Turn this puppy on.
Okay.
You can throw it over to me.
Yes.
So I've been doing a lot of watching on Zoom in the past 6 weeks.
Right.
And we definitely have a problem with our mics.
I did notice Chris was sitting at that right next to you, and that mic has a lot of feedback.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of inability to hear.
Yes.
And I have a feeling it's because these mics are too directional. Somebody turns their head and it gets lost.
Right.
Right. I could be wrong about that being the reason, but I thought these are really expensive mics.
Yes.
Did you actually turn on the thing in the back?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. It's all set.
Oh my goodness. What craziness. So did Jessica tell you that you talked to Lori and Lori said that she was going to accept?
Yes.
That's all I know, by the way.
Yes. I think she said she had to talk to her husband tonight.
Probably because she'd be missing dinner a few times.
Oh, right.
I don't know. Everybody has got their own.
Yes.
You know,
right.
I would be like, see ya, fend for yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Let me find my invitation. Oh. Jessica did not give you a folder with stuff in it for Ben to sign, right?
No.
Okay, I may have to print that.
I have some printed, but they're like in those packets. I have a couple
of the resolution and the letter.
Yeah.
Oh, we could just use those.
That's part of the.
Yeah. I just want him to sign it before he leaves the building tonight because I'm going to go right in there and scan it in and send it to Dola.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just need one.
Okay.
Okay.
Does have the pages, I don't know. Pointed out. So it has like from the
Oh,
I don't know if that's
you could sit right there.
The trustees would like me to sit here.
I think they would.
Okay,
So.
we wait to be called.
Considering there's nothing else on the agenda, it won't take long.
So I know Carbondale's informal.
Yep. And thank goodness for that, honestly.
Yeah.
Oh, that is the agenda. It's really not.
and it would yeah, it's just come from Zoom.
Yeah, it went straight to diligent. And I was like, wait, that's not where it's supposed to be. And it's not like I need to see the agenda.
Right.
I mean, usually, matter of fact, I bring this automatically just in case, because usually I set them both up and I can see all the documents on one, and then this one has the meeting on it.
Yeah.
But anyway,
here you go.
Ding dong.
All right. And thank you.
Are you? Is that me?
So you're the host.
Are you muted? Are you muted? Yeah, if you mute, I think that'll go away. All right. Nope. Are you on, Rob?
Like here.
No, the.
Oh, okay, you did. Never mind.
I
I was
just-
just trying to figure out where
Oh,
the
is
feedback
it
is
digital?
from. Huh?
Is this a digital or in person?
It is in person, but we always do them digitally because.
Yeah, but I
Zoom
didn't.
and everything. No, I just wondered because of the feedback.
Oh, no, I'm.
Now, as far as presentation, you probably want to go on the.
Can somebody do my slides maybe so I can. Like share them? The part of that is because I feel like I want to have access to information once you lock into a slide presentation.
Can you do split screen? Are you gonna take your notes on the computer or what?
I'll probably, you
So,
talking to me?
no, I'm talking to Kay. So if he sends you his slides, will you share them and then I'll just run the? Yeah. Okay.
So Darren, okay, how comfortable are you with Google? Slides.
Are they like,
It's just a different format than PowerPoint, but I mean, they're super easy to project, but you have to be able to log in.
I was gonna say, you just have a Google
So then
login.
I can,
You know what?
I
Here.
can send them as PDF.
yeah, that one.
They're super, like, they're
You know
the
what?
worst slides I've ever done aesthetically. So I can just send you a PDF.
Okay, that's better.
Sure.
And then I will go in. And. Make sure that. Everybody can share. Then
Can
you
you
need
tell
that remote.
me your email?
It is just the letter K, McDonald, MC, Yohan, ALP, at Carbondale, Sweden. That's what I was.
There you go.
Um. Are we recording?
I haven't started on mine.
That's fine.
It's on YouTube,
Okay. Okay,
so we are on YouTube.
totally fine. Because usually Jessica does the recording piece and then passes it over to me, and I just want to make sure that,
Oh, Jessica's not here tonight.
right, it's her, so,
Okay,
okay,
you're sitting in for.
Yep.
All right.
she does other boards. We're basically, there's not a tutor here, right? Are the doors open to the outside?
Yes.
That's all the questions of you that I possibly could ask. Let's see. What can this?
Format for me too. I'm like, I hope I don't screw it.
Oh, it should be really good. So that's ready to be signed. This is not.
Did I tell you about my co-ed meeting? I couldn't.
No. I was afraid of, Ben brought that up this morning and I said to him, I don't know if they're ready for this.
Yeah, that's.
And he said, well, there's always gotta be a first time. And I said, Not necessarily with this, it's too visible. It's too visible.
After a, like a 15-minute discussion, I leaned in as hard as I could to, you know, I know you guys have developed a system that's for one thing and you have this slightly adjacent thing that your system would fit for, it just doesn't fit your rules. Can you bend your, you know, definitions? And I got a 66% no vote and a 33% yes vote.
Yeah, they're kind of like, we're here to support disasters.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? By the way, speaking of disasters, did you talk to these people?
I emailed them and I haven't heard back. I asked, sent them my email.
And I don't know if they'll be here, but Ben ran into him and Erica emailed him, so.
So today, I gotta tell Ben, Ben knows this because I texted him. I was knocking on the door trying to find a way into the Orchard Church today, and I got a text from Ben making introductions to Pastor Daniel. And I texted back, amazing coincidence, I'm at your front door looking for a way in. And then he calls me, he says, are you really? I said, yeah, I'm standing outside the church.
So was he there?
Yeah, he was there, so we had a talk. And
Oh,
I
that's
don't
so
think they're
funny.
gonna have overnight shelter, but I think they're gonna be really helpful, a lot of it. So, and
Yeah.
I'm not gonna name names for the students, but it was like, well, obviously a lot of good guys who stayed out of, you know, Providence.
Did I tell you that I got copied on Ben's response? Okay, this makes me a little bit nervous. His response to the Washington Post.
Was I on that?
I don't know, were you on that?
I'm also on another Washington Post exchange because they're researching something on a different topic that
This, yeah, this, nope.
I'm not.
I
Oh, yeah.
thought I was BCC, so you might have gotten it too, because I don't show up on in the addressee.
All I have is I have some availability.
Yeah, but do you see the bottom? Her request saying she'll be on the Zoom for the meeting. If she's watching. Okay. Which, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, that's not surprising though, but.
No, it's
you know,
great,
like,
it's
you're-
just,
I didn't hear that story on NPR, but you know, the national press is looking for.
oh, he's some Dola. Hi, Dana. I see him too.
His brother who has an adorable. Yeah, Esmeralda. Cordelia. I just didn't say what.
Yeah.
I was just, Kirby.
Shakespeare.
Yeah.
They're in town.
They'll be here.
And we'll be traveling, so.
How old is your niece now?
She's two. And then they have a baby boy.
Oh, they have a baby.
Who is 6 months.
Oh, cute. Very cute.
Yeah.
He was a good proponent too. So that
Oh,
was-
good. I know. I told Charlie that. I was like, he's-
Okay, it being 6:01, we'll call the meeting to order. Thanks everybody for being here for a special meeting. That's not our normal meeting cadence. Kate, could we start off with roll call, please?
Ben Bomfa,
Here.
Chris Hassig. Absent. Lonnie Kitching. Here. Colin Laird,
Here.
Marty Silverstein,
Here.
Erica Sparhawk. Here. Luis Yanis.
Here.
Everybody. We only have one real item on the agenda for action and discussion tonight, but we will go through our routine because it is a special meeting, so it's a formal agenda. Starting off with persons present not on the agenda. If you'd like to just give us a general comment, or if anybody online would like to speak up now. Our one item on the agenda is about the Venezuelan refugee response, but you can technically address us on anything. Anybody like to address the board this time? All right, thanks. We'll move on. Any trustee comments since last week?
One brief one.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank and acknowledge our Western Region ranching community for participating in and persevering through the last 2 years of the Wolf Reintroduction Resource Management Planning process. I know there's been ample media coverage lately as we've gotten closer to the first breeding pairs expected to arrive here this coming Friday. And I mention this because we're, of course, in the heart of the first relocation zone, which will be a hard release, meaning no acclimatization waiting period. They're going straight from Oregon capture, collared, and let go as soon as they hit the ground, which is no big deal as these are resourceful critters, but they can move. Like our big cats, wolves can cover about 150 miles in 2 days as they establish their territories. So stay tuned. We will be hearing new voices mixed in with the coyotes one starry night soon. And then next will come the wolverines with their fuzzy dispositions being somewhere between a mad cat and a raging bull, but that's for next year. So I'll just end by extending holiday best wishes to the municipality of Carbondale from the State of Colorado Wildlife Council. Thank you.
Any other comments? Marty?
Yeah, two quick ones. Just a note, today is Colorado Gives Day. So if you're gonna give to a local nonprofit, that your gift is matched to a certain degree by some local business organizations, statewide business organizations. So it's a great day to give. Just go online, type in Colorado Gives, and you'll find it. Second thing, to our members of the Jewish community, happy Hanukkah before our next meeting. And I'll leave it at that. And let's on with the show.
All right, thanks, Marty. Any other comments? I'll add a couple quick ones. I neglected to mention at our last meeting that Lauren and I had a really nice meeting with the U.S. Forest Service a couple weeks ago now in late November, where they went through line by line the letter that we submitted to them and responded to each of those points. They are proceeding with, as you probably read, with demolition and eventual construction of their new office. But it was a really good meeting. I think it reiterated that we have a strong partnership with them. They were very receptive to all the suggestions in that, which weren't save all the trees and move the building. They were very constructive about things that they could really look into, and they've looked into those. As I'll say, just generally, they've done the things that they could do within the scope and the timeline of the current project. But wanted to let everyone know that we did have that follow-up meeting, and they were the ones that initiated that. Also had a meeting today, kind of wearing two hats, but with the Roaring Fork School District, about the concerns that the board had raised. And when Nikki Delson and the Down Valley Jewish community mentioned wanting to be informed whenever there's a swastika or any other symbolism of anti-Semitism in our schools. So our acting superintendent, our public information officer, and then me I can't help but have my head in both organizations in a meeting like that, but really trying to represent our interest as a board in being informed when there's an act of hate speech in our schools, the schools being part of the community. There's no hard action taken. It was just kind of a listening session, and the school district committed to continuing conversations about putting together something systematic. We had an agreement last year that really wasn't systematic, and that's why it fell through when there was staff turnover. So trying to look district-wide, we serve 3 communities. There's lots of groups that might want to know about various things, and how can we put together a system that achieves that and is sustainable and withstands turnover. So just ongoing conversations, and I'll update the board as that goes. Attorney's not here tonight, so we'll skip attorney's comments. Lauren, anything you want to add before we dive into the main item?
Sure. Just very briefly, just want to let the board know that Carbondale submitted a letter of intent for Proposition 123 planning capacity grant. The days are running together. Maybe that was yesterday, or I think it was yesterday. And, we'll see if we're invited to submit a full application. But Amy, Kimberly, and Jared and myself worked pretty hard on that. So hopefully, see what happens.
And that was for Town Center, I assume?
That was for Town Center.
Okay, great.
Well, it wasn't for Town Center. It was for things related to Town Center, but it's really about fast tracking affordable housing approvals.
Right.
And Town Center certainly is the project at hand, but it's for everything from code modifications to upgrading and digitizing our application and review process so that it's faster and more efficient, and some consultancy to sort of review our system and give us some advice as to how to improve it. This fast track system through Prop 123 doesn't become a requirement until 2027, but when it does, it pretty much requires from the time a full application is submitted to the time it's approved, 90 days.
Wow.
So we have some work to do.
Okay.
So that's really what that's for. Town Center's just on the front of everybody's mind, but this will be much longer lasting than that.
That's great. I mean, that's in alignment with the things we've been asking our one-person planning department to do, is try to expedite some of that. And so It's a great idea to try to get some technical assistance with that and some state level support.
And then the only other thing that I have, which is related to this, is if you're not aware, We hit morning edition on NPR this morning nationally with our project in protecting and welcoming the newcomers in our community. And that was a surprise to me. I got 3 texts at around 7 a.m. from the East Coast. We heard you on NPR. It's like, oh, okay. So anyway, just be aware it's out there at the national level. So
Right.
that's all I have.
Thank you, Lauren. We can dive into the main agenda item, which is Venezuelan refugee response. I'll just remind the public and ourselves that we've talked about this. I believe this is about the 4th time now. I think every meeting in November we talked about it. And we've consistently established that our goals are to provide short-term support to help people who've landed in our community who are temporarily unhoused to get through the winter. That we acknowledge what a big challenge this is for us because we really don't have a safety net for unhoused folks in Carbondale. But that we want to respond to this focusing on the life safety issues of the risks of sleeping outdoors, as well as mitigating the impacts that if we don't respond are going to be felt throughout our community. That we want to respond with compassion and in a way that I think we'll look back on and be proud of, while at the same time not becoming such an attractive and welcoming place that we become a main destination for more people than our community can absorb. We've talked about the fact that our community has a long history of successfully absorbing and integrating immigrants from lots of different places, especially lots of countries in Latin America, and that what sets this group apart is their lack of community ties, but that we absorb this many people in the community every year, I'm sure, and we just don't see it because most people come with a community tie. So we've also talked about trying to assist in ways that can help the folks that are here become assets to the community rather than burdens on the community. And the main goal there is helping them with access to documentation for the ability to work. And our understanding is that many or most, if not all, may qualify for temporary protected status. And we have a severe labor shortage in really every industry at every level and every skill set. And so they may be very, very helpful for helping some of our businesses and core institutions run. Yeah, we've tried so far, and what we'll really dive into now is figuring out exactly what the town's role is. We've talked about trying to limit the town's role and try to engage with other governmental agencies, nonprofits, the faith community who share a lot of these goals. But we understand that the town does have a role to play, and that role tonight I think we'll see is a leadership role in facilitating access to funding and in building a system, but ideally not being the ones doing everything and directly providing services, and especially long-term. So with that, hand it off to Lauren or Rob, whoever wants to go first. Rob Stein's here, who we've engaged to help us think this through.
You want me to just give an overview of sort of what I've been working on, and then of course Lauren has a lot more I think that she needs your attention to. And Kay, I asked Kay to drive some slides for me so that I can get access to information in other tabs if you have questions along the way that I don't have. And I need to say this is the absolute worst slide presentation I've ever assembled, and I'm embarrassed because the mayor, also in a former role, helped me learn how to do better than this. So I apologize. But basically, I spent some time just trying to copy a lot of text because I think it would be easier for you to have some words in front of you so I can go through material rather quickly. So no pictures, no animations, too many words on the page. But I just wanted to see if I could give you a flyby of what I'm learning along the way. As an educator, I'm ashamed of myself. But if you look at the next slide, and you'll see that this slide is bracketed with qualifiers just because it's very hard to get accurate numbers, but as a working sort of outline of the scale of the number of people we're talking about, it seems about 100 people are currently in the Carbondale vicinity in this group of new arrivals, mostly but not entirely from Venezuela. And the fact that they're from Venezuela has a lot to do with some of the legal protections or legal status that may help them and help us, help them find a way forward. Vast majority are men. About 60 per night have been sheltering at the 3rd Street Center, and then some other numbers have been sleeping outside outside of the 3rd Street Center in cars or in other places in the general Carbondale area, but we don't know the exact numbers. And then there are a handful of families who have been sheltered through efforts largely of Voces Unidas and other nonprofits and agencies that are working to support. And so some have secured housing, at least for the next few weeks or up to a few months in hotels in the area. There's still some families and children sleeping in the 3rd Street Center, and that's something that we want to, aggressively work to, eliminate that of having families there. About 2/3, according to Voces Unidas, qualify for temporary protective status, and Voces is setting up legal clinics and so forth to, help accelerate or facilitate the pathway to working status for those folks. So, I think, and this next slide is just from my notes from your last meeting, but as I understand our charge or my charge is threefold. First, immediate humanitarian needs. Specifically or particularly securing shelter for about 100 folks between now through the end of March, when the weather will improve and the life-threatening circumstances might abate. The second is, and Ben spoke to this, is trying to foster a more regional approach and activate other agencies and nonprofits and governments to work together on this, and recognizing there's a regional and not just a town phenomenon. And then third way has been also addressed is trying to facilitate a pathway to working status to get people into the economy and contributing and self-sufficiency. So if you look at the next slide, we have some scenarios and they're going to be out of order, but I kept the numbering of the orders for those because I had some of you share drafts. I didn't want to be overly confusing. So but the current scenarios, we have about about 60 people every night in the 3rd Street Center. There's some turnover, but there's a core group that has been relatively consistently there, consistently stable. Voces Unidas de Las Montañas has been managing and coordinating that site with a lot of support from Colin and his team. They are not the organization that wants to be doing this or that we would want to be doing this, because they're really an advocacy organization. So part of our challenge is how do we relieve them of some of this burden and start shifting it to more appropriate agencies to carry the load. But they've been doing a phenomenal job. There's a staff member on site, she's full-time. She's not there 24 hours, but she's a full-time employee who I think has been doing a great job coordinating resources and putting out not literal fires, but responding to problems as they come up. So I really, I think that the town should, and especially those folks should be credited for, many things that they're doing right now. And I don't need to enumerate, but I've listed some of the challenges that, are presenting, that anybody who is expert in the world of sheltering, which I'm not, would point out some gaps, separation of the sexes, crowding or ratios, additional services and access to additional services that shelters try to provide. The facility itself is an elementary school built to probably 1950s plumbing standards, and so showers, kitchens, and those sorts of facilities are not available there. And then, of course, there's just the burden on this single facility that's, it's inhibiting its own ability to offer its programs. And the other users or the other tenants at the 3rd Street have been very patient, but I think they're running out of gas, and we need to help them as soon as possible. A lot of the folks have purchased cars, many of which are unregistered or uninsured, and are parked in the facility and elsewhere throughout town. So as I'll talk a little bit more about this, but one of the things we need to address is this significant number of vehicles that are not really roadworthy. And the police have been very flexible and helpful in giving people some leeway, but they will impound and have impounded at least one vehicle when people are driving without plates, meaning without registration or insurance. And so we need to make sure that that's part of the solution is we address this large number of vehicles. Things we need to make sure no matter what we do moving forward is increasing the staffing to probably 2 or 3 full-time staff members, increase to offering more security. And Lauren might say more about it, but she's actively working on contracting with the private security firm to supplement what the town police can do. We need to improve access to restrooms and showers, though I think we've had a breakthrough in the past week in terms of opening up the showers in this building and in the rec center here from 9 to 3. And in the rec center during their operating hours for 2 people at a time, because there's a shower in the men's and a shower in the women's locker room in the rec center. And the rec center staff have been very supportive and very helpful in working out a mechanism for tallying people who come. And I was just there just before this meeting, and there were 7 or 8 guys hanging out waiting their turn. And I asked them how it was going. And, it seemed to be, we're still working out some kinks, but it seemed to be going very well. We also could start using some school district showers if we needed more scale. And because I have a relationship with the school district, I'm happy to help supervise that. So anyway, I think the shower problem is being addressed, and that's not going to be one of the big obstacles moving forward. Kitchens, that's still a challenge, and we'll need to figure out cooking and service facilities, no matter what, scenario the town chooses to pursue. Separation of sexes and families, I've talked about that, overcrowding. And then just some of the, we need to find qualified agencies to step up and give us assistance. I'll talk more about some of that later. And then I'll just say this about fundraising now. We're working to set up a fund through Aspen Community Foundation. So I've heard from some people, and I'm sure many of you have as well from your constituents, I want to give money, I want to give time. How do I do that? And right now I'm furiously just taking notes on who wants to give either. And I'll get back to them, but I can't manage, groups of volunteers, and I can't manage funds, but we hope to set up systems by which volunteers can be better plugged in. So far, VOCES has done a good job of receiving funds and spending them on the things that need to be done, food and groceries and legal expenses and housing and transportation, the things people need. So, things are happening, but I think we can be much more efficient and manage better scale. And then, as I said, the parking. So interrupt me along the way if I'm moving too fast. I kind of want to plow through and get this on the table, and then you all can give feedback and direction and also brainstorm other ideas and solutions. So one alternative to the current is very similar, and this is where we started, is let's just find a better facility, one large facility where we can have round the clock access to shelter and start to wrap around services and supports in that single setting. And that centralized location works well because it's efficient. We could control it all the time. And be easier for staff and others to engage there. The challenges are, frankly, that we've just run out of options. We've looked at every available site we could think of. I know Lauren reported at the last meeting I attended, which I think was 2 meetings ago, about some of the, the first ideas that came to mind, and basically they've all just been eliminated. But it's also not ideal to have that many people concentrated in one facility because the social dynamic isn't ideal. The parking dynamic isn't ideal. It puts a lot of impact in a single neighborhood and so forth. And so there are, it may be the easiest if we could find the site, but we can't find the site, and there are other disadvantages. So, and this is where I lose order on what I've shared with a couple of you in print, but there's a thing called a man camp, and that's actually a word. I just learned it, but basically a modular encampment that they often use for major disaster relief or oil and gas or construction sites, where they bring in a group of modulars, and typically they'll be, maybe 1,000 square foot open spaces with a small bathroom facilities where they could use dorms, or they can even break them into dorm rooms, and then a kitchen facility, a shower and bathroom facility, even a, rec room, community room, laundry. I've seen some pretty elaborate designs. The folks at Eagle County are actually helping to research this and price it and look at possibilities. The town owns 2 properties that should be considered, both the rodeo grounds and the RV park, as potential sites for this. I think the RV park is probably better in most ways, proximity,
et cetera. But those are two sites that could be explored. What I'm hearing so far is it's extremely expensive, and for this short duration, it may not be very practical. So, my recommendation would just say, let's continue to learn, but put that on the back burner as a viable solution for a short term. So then the final scenario, which seems to be the most viable at this time, is to identify some smaller sites to spread out the load and distribute numbers in a range from 10 to 40 people per site. So far, the sites that we've identified that have high potential are all in a relatively tight vicinity around this corridor from 3rd Street to the town center, or excuse me, to the town hall. So it makes it easier for walkability and for, say, those things like showers or kitchens that may not be in each site, for people to get access to them. I do need to just tell the trustees that it seems to me that if the town is going to ask some churches or nonprofits or community centers to carry this load, that you all should be considering if this building could be considered the rec center. This model looks more like overnight shelter as opposed to round the clock shelter, so that it liberates the facility during the day for other uses. And it sort of blends efforts, so there'd be some government facilities, there'd be some nonprofit or some private facilities. So it really, in some ways, to me, it looks like how Carbondale rolls. It's and everybody's in this together, and we're all gonna, do some of the lift. It also allows the advantages of if numbers increase, we're looking for another site incrementally to take on more people. We're not just looking at, this is our box and this is our max, and then we have nothing more. And as the weather improves and the town hopes to taper this kind of support, it's easier one by one to bring these different sites offline. So I think the biggest problem is just that it wouldn't be a 24-hour facility. And so we need to think through all of those logistics. And there's just going to be, when you spread it out, there's going to be more staffing and custodial and other kinds of complexity to consider. So this is at least a starting list of what it would take to succeed. If you don't mind going to the next slide. Sorry, I forget I have to do the auditory thing. So, the staffing, the day storage for bedding and supplies. I think insurance is no longer a problem, but that's been a first question that every site is asked, that the town, if we lease if we lease a site, then the town's insurance will cover them. Parking, we need to probably identify some parking sites that allow people to park safely, where they're not going to be ticketed or towed if their cars aren't registered, because these cars are also, for many of these folks, being used as storage. So they need access. It can't just be locked up somewhere. And between this lot and the RV park, it seems like there's good parking that's relatively proximal that could be used for that. Either a single kitchen facility where we could serve meals, or rotating kitchen facilities, maybe a number of churches or restaurants or something could take shifts, but the whole food prep and food service needs to be addressed. If we're going to tell people they have to leave in the morning, then we have to tell them some places where they can be, especially in cold weather and when they don't have jobs for the day. And so some kind of day shelter arrangements that are organized and monitored, and working with places to work out managerial agreements, a lot like we've done with the showers, would have to be part of this. I think I said storage for people's belongings. And then, if sites are going to give up some of their evening programming for this, then we need to help them with alternative sites for where they can, they can move those programs that have been displaced. And then finally, none of these facilities are set up for 20 people or more sleeping overnight. So we need to augment with porta potties, other restroom facilities, trash removal, and things like that. Custodial. Yeah. So I'm going to just pause there, because then I'm moving on to other stuff. So I'm not sure I'm asking for direction, because I only see one path at this point, but I just want to pause and either hear questions or give you all a chance to react and discuss.
That's great. Thanks, Rob. I really appreciate kind of the systematic overview. I think you've cast a really wide net here, and it's like you've put everything on the table and you've gone ahead and kind of narrowed it down to what seems to make the most sense. But let's discuss and see if we agree that essentially a proposal for a distributed network of sites seems to make the most sense to us. Questions?
Yeah, I've got some thoughts. So I came from an immigrant family, and back in the 50s, there were sponsorships required. And I thought maybe if we take a look back at what that entailed, we can involve the community a little bit more in some of this engagement, if willing. It would be on a volunteer basis, but at least it would spread some of this load out. And engage the community, which seems to be something that you've been asked how to do. I don't know what the legalities of that is, or really what the qualifications would be. I mean, clearly back then, there were a list of qualifications that an incoming family would have to meet in order to gain recognition by a sponsor. But once they were in there, then they were established. So that's just a thought that I had, having gone through that process myself. And then as far as the kitchen facilities are concerned, I remember doing a tour through the youth entity facility, and they have quite a large kitchen facility that they were giving classes to. So perhaps they can be approached to engage in doing some of that prep stuff or whatever it is that needs to be done from a food service standpoint.
Thanks, Lonnie. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, I'll just comment on your idea of like the kind of the refugee resettlement sponsorship program. I actually was doing research on this, over the last few weeks, like we've all probably done, asking the question, like, where's the federal government's organized plan for resettling all these folks that we've admitted to the country? And found this very great program that exists on the State Department website, but it's evident, and I've been in contact with our local staff from Senator Bennett's office who may be listening tonight, and they've looked into it, but I believe it's set up for people who have already gone through the asylum seeker and refugee designation process in their country of origin. And then it's like, you're really set up with a host family, there's a payment made and a network around you. And it just doesn't, in my research so far, it doesn't appear to be set up for this. But I think the idea of, are you suggesting sort of on the local level, could we just kind of do our own, like sponsor a refugee type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like we are the sponsor currently. And we're looking for help,
Yeah.
right? So if we could take components of that old model
Yeah.
and perhaps request assistance from the community members who are interested and willing, then that could be some help.
Yeah, and what I heard is more what you were saying, that in general, and I was going to speak a little more to sort of this activate the community theme, which was one of the goals of the trustees that I heard from the last meeting I attended, is if we could find a group that wanted to take that on, because it's somewhat of a bounded project. How could we find, like, activate maybe families that wanted, if not to bring people into their homes, to, other ways to sort of adopt somebody through the winter. And that's certainly a good idea. At this point, I've been more working at that infrastructural level to say, if somebody wanted to take that on, how do we connect them to what they need to be successful and run with it?
And one thought was in the last meeting was to potentially reactivate the COVID task force. And maybe Lauren, you've done that.
That is certainly one of the considerations. There are also a number of groups that have approached me that may be willing to take on the management of meals or take on some sort of donation matching for maybe clothing and snow boots and those kinds of things, or actual coming up with funding to help pay for some of these applications for work permits and things like that. I think the community wants to be very involved in general. And one of our tasks is to figure out what is the path for that, so that it's not just, snowballs coming from every direction, right? So you're absolutely right, Lonnie. But those are the kinds of networks that we're trying to set in place. And we're getting there, but we're not there yet.
And it seems like it's a both and, right? It's like there's an immediate need for shelter and we need to relieve the pressure on the Third Street Center as soon as possible.
That's right.
And we need to set up other things to further disperse the impacts
Right.
and enable people to come forward and support, which I think we've all heard. There's lots of goodwill in this community. Erica.
Well, and I would add to that, and also, I mean, I know you're thinking about this a lot and taking all these, I like the snowball analogy, and you are, and I know the Third Street Center is, and I'm sure VOSIS is as well. So thinking through where I think the emergency task force, I mean, that got set up with a really specific framework that I pulled up because it was a, resident who manages emergencies who kind of was like, here's what you do. And I think making sure that you guys are getting the support that you need and that we can, because what was really cool about the emergency task force, which was for COVID, for those listening, was we had assigned leads on all these different topics. And so that way, whether it was coordinating with the volunteers and they could look into how can we activate our community and who are we gonna, they were in charge of that. And we had two people in charge of that. We had somebody who was the government liaison with all the local governments, And so I think as we move forward, I want to make sure that you guys don't get burnt out and we don't overload you, that we think about.
Well,
kind
how
of
you're
using
describing
this.
the thinking is very much how I've been thinking
I
too,
figured.
because there's like, shelter, procuring shelter, then there's the management of the shelter. I mean, I'm talking about all these sort of leads, either an organization or an individual, but like some of these
Exactly.
organizational scale fundraising I've mentioned, communications I'm going to talk about in a minute. I think food is a big one, food preparation and delivery, whatever, serving.
Coordinating.
And so, breaking these things down. And then there's some easier stuff like clothing, it's easier to get donations. It's easier to distribute clothing and stuff. But, the big ones, I would say that coordinating shelter, and then coordinating not just the shelter, but then the interface with all these other agencies that are there to support people, whether it's legal services or human services or whatever, health services.
Yep.
But all those other organizations actually are there already.
Exactly.
It's that connective
Yeah.
tissue. And so I think your reasoning and your outline, and by the way, the individuals who are lead on that task force, we've reached out to them. Because there's a lot we can learn.
I was on it
Having
too.
that conversation.
But
Yeah.
and so I can share this with you too, so at least it helped me think through
Zip it my
like,
way, it'd be great.
how it was put together and how we were able to kind of take action so quick. And then the group of us, we met weekly. We just had a Monday morning call. And it was really, it was COVID, so we were on Zoom all the time, but in fact, we never saw each other in person.
By the way, my snowball analogy,
Yes.
snowballs came to mind because this weekend, the newcomers at the Third Street Center had the most raucous snowball fight. Probably what I heard, 50, 60 people out there just blasting each other and giggling like little kids. So, and that came from one of the neighbors on Second Street,
Right.
that they so enjoyed just watching them have fun.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's
So,
fun.
All right, other feedback, questions, comments on kind of this general approach that Rob's proposing of a distributed network of shelters in the community. Marnie.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. A lot of information, a lot of directions, couple of questions. My understanding to get their temporary status is about $450 in terms of money and a several month process, not even if we started today, it might not be done by the end of March. The problem with that is then getting, aside from day labor, okay, someone like Skico or a hotel in Aspen, which unfortunately has the jobs and has some employee housing that they could potentially offer them, but they wouldn't be qualified for it. So that's one problem. The other thing is we need some type of identification, and I'm not saying like a government issued ID, who these people are, how many there are, because it's gone from 80 to 100. My understanding as of last week was 125. And if we set this up the way we're looking at it, I think it would be terrific, but it also be very desirable to other people. And all it takes is a telephone, a cell phone call to Denver. And we could easily double that number in a matter of weeks. So we're having a hard enough time dealing with the numbers we already have. We can't be a safe haven for everybody.
And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we're gonna face throughout this whole thing. I mean, I think where we're headed is to cap it at 100 and say, this is what we can house. I think we're gonna have to continue to work with other municipalities around us and counties and others throughout the state and advocate at the state and national level even for some way to distribute folks. There are a lot of other places that can absorb some people. And it's like the model of instead of one big shelter with everybody and all those impacts, the maybe 5 for 20-person shelter is the same model in every community, absorb 100 people. You know, you wouldn't have a crisis anymore. So I agree, Marty. And I think it's a really hard thing to achieve, but I think we do have to set a pretty hard cap and say that's as far as we're gonna go.
We have also had a few people who were here who are not here anymore for one reason or another. Couple of them have gone back to Denver. There is at least one person, two people who have another opportunity or are headed to another state where there's been housing promised. So there's a lot of that sort of underlying work happening as well.
I'm just saying we need to
Yeah.
have a good grasp of what the numbers are. The numbers I know are gonna fluctuate. Someone gets a better offer somewhere else,
Mhm.
that's fine, but we need to know that. And if 10 more people show up, we need to know that also.
Also, Sunitas has estimated at this point, I forget the number, that they've had about 145 individuals who have interacted with Carbondale during this process.
Yeah. I mean, VOCIS is the group that has been taking the census and then sharing those numbers with us. And once we find another manager for this process, the sheltering process, then that census taking, you know, like signing people in. And so, you know, we have that list that we then give to the rec center so they know, you know, check off people when they come to shower, et cetera. So I don't want you to think it isn't happening. And I also think it will improve when we start to transfer that load to whoever is going to carry it.
Other feedback on this proposed approach or questions, Luis?
I'm just curious in terms of, you know, yes, we're obviously over 100 now, but as the weather improves, I mean, how do we then put that cap? I mean, then could be open season again in terms of just having the influx of more than 200, you know. I mean, I read that there's a bus that arrived just yesterday to Denver. So, I mean, as more refugees are potentially headed here, that I think it's an issue we're addressing now because of the weather, but the fact that they were not on the radar over the summer is something that could potentially flare up again. So I'm just curious in terms of how that's something that we think about further ahead.
About half an hour ago, actually, because we've set this parameter, this time frame, and parameters on numbers. And, you know, whereas the initial focus and thrust of this is life safety and to keep people from, we don't want anybody dying on our watch because they're out in the cold, what have you. But the minute we get something set up, we're going to have to start thinking about what happens in March, right? But right now, my thought process is one thing at a time, get a system in place, and then immediately start figuring out, all right, let's track this. What does it look like? What if this? What if that? How are we going to react? You know, all of those contingencies that hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to try to figure out, as opposed to just having it in our doorway right now and having it be more of an emergent situation.
But you're right, Luis. Opening it may end up being the easy part. Closing it may end up being the hardest part.
Right.
I think it's good to have a goal and a parameter and to communicate that, just like lots of shelters have a certain number of days you can stay, to let people know, like, this is short term. You need to get on your feet. If you're not finding a sustainable solution around here, we're gonna help you get somewhere else. But we're not gonna be able to absorb this really long term.
Yeah, I saw shelters in Denver had a certain timeline for families that was longer and then obviously a shorter timeline for single men. So it was interesting to read.
Thoughts, feedback, questions about the general approach? I mean, we need at least sort of a like nod that, does this seem like the right approach out of essentially the three options? One big one that we're not finding, a man camp, or the middle ground.
Give you really viable choices.
Right.
The comparable options.
It-
Kind of like parenting, isn't it?
Yeah. It's just the reality.
Yeah. Yep. No, I think this is, I mean, I think my guess is that we've probably all been thinking that without having a big building step up and even thinking through like what could really be big enough and adequate enough that distributed makes a lot of sense. And then, I mean, what we heard, at least from a couple other folks, was the insurance seemed like this kind of, or the liability seemed like this barrier, and then probably kind of that staffing component. So if we're taking that on and, removing those barriers, then it starts to seem like those should open up. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
Colin?
Just echoing Luis, this is an enormous problem, right? We don't know how this is going to be resolved, but what I like about the approach we have here is that we're trying to make it more manageable. 60th 3rd Street's not really manageable, so we're trying to make it smaller, and it becomes, I think, a better model for other communities, because no one has a big space they can house 100 or 60 people, but people have places they can take 10 or 15. So I think it's great to have some goals and we adapt as possible, but I think this is our best strategic approach in terms of, making it a little bit more manageable, given that it's a crazy situation that we find ourselves in.
Okay. Sounds like we're on the right track.
More sort of sections in their brief, but one of them is super brief. I just want to validate, and I know you're hearing it, like who's doing what. People are feeling like, what's happening and are we communicating? And this is a great forum for the public to hear. I reached out to, well, for one thing, the town has a great public information officer, Anna Ramirez. But she's got a full-time job in another capacity with the town. And so until she's freed up from that to work on public information full-time, I contacted a couple colleagues with whom I've worked in the past who have a consulting business on top of their full-time jobs. And so they're helping the town and me organize and start to get further ahead of the communications challenges. And I think it's really important to emphasize that just us being able to communicate to the refugees themselves as information presents. So for example, I think the showers is a great example. So we've opened up the showers, but how do you know about it? So we've made a commitment to bilingual communications. I guess pieces depending on what the need is. And, here's how you can get a shower. Here's how you can get bus tickets and transportation. Here's the legal clinics we're setting up. So just a better job of building a body of communications pieces that can be offered in Spanish and in English. And the importance of English is also does the staff know what the expectations are too? So that's happening. Better able to coordinate communications internally and partnerships when we're doing a better job of pushing out communications. And then finally, the general public wants to know, I know you all have been hearing that too. And so that's a very important audience. And so this is a draft of a work plan. It may not be what we ultimately do. I'm sorry. Thank you for staying ahead of me without me communicating about communications. But anyway, so this is what you can expect to see is something like this. This isn't a promise. This is a draft of a plan, but something at least comparable to this is already underway, and you'll see more shortly being produced. And then finally, and this is just more of a checklist to remind myself on that community collaboration front. Again, I think, we owe a lot of gratitude to Voces Unidas for both identifying and calling the public's attention to this challenge, and also for carrying the load so far in coordinating the services provided at the shelter. Of course, Collin and 3rd Street Center are equally deserving of all of our gratitude. Want to say that the Family Resource Centers and Valley Settlement together worked very closely whenever there's a child age 0 to 21 involved. And so when I think about the structural responses available, when there's a kid in the mix, all they need to do is contact one of those organizations. The best way to do that is to take the kid and enroll them in school. And that activates not only schooling, but all the other services, including housing, medical, mental health, food assistance, transportation assistance. I think I said housing assistance. And so that they're running low on resources. So it's not a bottomless well of funding, but at least it's a structure in place. And so it's where, I mean, I think our community and our society has more heart for kids, and it's where there's also better structural supports for that. But those two organizations have really built a great network from Parachute all the way to Aspen for supporting those efforts. The counties have been helping in a lot of different ways. Eagle County, I mentioned, is doing a lot of sort of pro bono research, and Pickens County has kicked in with the COTS and other materials, and they're all working as much as they can to help behind the scenes. They're waiting a little bit to be activated. The faith community is there. They've been preparing and delivering meals. They too were sort of waiting to be activated. It may be that some churches will be part of the solution for shelter sites, but it's definitely true that for like meals and like clothing and other assistance like that. And we're in a moment right now where the faith community used to have a very active interfaith group of clerics that met regularly. And a couple of years ago, there were like 30 people attending those meetings. The last meeting, I think it was this summer, 3 people attended. And so they've been kind of dormant. And there's an individual cleric who's the coordinator of that. And so I've been in communication with her about reactivating that group and getting back, some kind of, more regular operation for their help. I'm not going to list the other nonprofits and organizations, but there are many who have been helping or are ready to help. And so it's mostly just building those pathways. I want to say something just finally, and this is my last thing about COAD, which is a rarely new group locally, and that's an acronym for Community Organizations Active in Disaster. I think that's a federal thing. If not, it's a state thing. But basically, it's a group of counties and other agencies and nonprofits that work together when disaster strikes. And I met with them today. And the discussion was largely around, we've built this thing in what they call blue skies, because there have been another incidents in the community like fires where we felt less than fully prepared. So they have this infrastructure and this design in place, but they have yet to be activated. I also learned today that it takes not just any government agency, but it has to be a county that actually requests activation. So I was under the misimpression, I probably conveyed that the town could do it, and they can't just declare it an emergency. It has to come from the county. They spent a lot of time discussing the definition of disaster and whether an immigration or a sudden infusion of people who are unhoused would fit within that definition. And they took a vote and they voted no, it does not. And so they don't want to formally activate as a group. They also recognize that many of the member organizations are going to be involved anyway. And one thing I learned is that there's probably maybe or possibly, I don't know if I want to say probably, a path forward for the Red Cross to help us set up our next iteration of our sheltering operations. And so that's very promising, because I don't think there's a more expert organization here or across the nation or maybe the world than the Red Cross to help us build that. So even if we got a couple weeks of support from the Red Cross to help us get this thing up and running, that would be good. So those are some next steps for me to be working on. That's pretty much the end of my slides and words, but happy to hear further questions or feedback.
Thanks, Rob. And I think we'll hear an update from Lauren and talk about these documents whenever we're finished talking with Rob. Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, this is just quick. 3rd Street has to be a priority. I mean, they're overwhelmed. They've done awesome work for getting the people out of there, to the tenants, to the people, to the community that use 3rd Street for meetings all the time. They've done a great job, and I don't think it'll happen in a week. But I think it needs to be one of the things in terms, if you set up smaller shelter areas, we need to get the people from 3rd Street there. Thank you, some points that ran true to me: separation of sexes, increased security. Anytime, it can be a volatile situation. You have people living in close quarters under a lot of stress. And I know they've been policing themselves, but there also needs to be some type of outside security there. Oh, just,
Thanks, Marty. Anything else on those last points, Lonnie?
It seems like COAD is more geared towards natural disaster relief. And so I'm glad to hear that the Red Cross is showing some interest in that, because I would imagine that they're more geared towards that as well, which is positive. And then you mentioned a couple of comments about the counties being involved, but I didn't hear Garfield County.
I'll speak.
Okay.
is it really necessary?
Okay, any other questions or feedback for Rob at this point?
I just want to thank you. It's really impressive and sort of exactly followed some of the ideas I was gonna float if we hadn't already followed them down to the nth degree, way beyond my initial thoughts. But yeah, I think the distributed idea is where I landed to and makes it easier to make a kind of bite-sized ask for somebody to say, hey, can you deal with 10 people, not can you deal with 75 or whatever. So that, and then do you feel like the task force is, that sounds like a great idea to me, but I don't know if that feels like too much reporting and going in between. I mean, at this point, I know you sort of like acted, just directly and very effectively, it seems like so far. And I don't know, want to slow you down with a lot of like.
I think it's a good idea, especially because I know a couple of those individuals. And so I think it's not about creating another thing. It's about saying like, let's see if we can
Yeah.
sort of merge some of those habits and some of those very good personalities with some other efforts and build more of a steering group that expands, beyond what we currently have.
Yeah, because I feel like, we probably have a limited amount of time we can devote to constantly monitoring this. And if we could have another group that's more qualified, really, frankly, to be the bouncing board for you, I think that's and seems more effective than us trying to run it. But and otherwise, I really like all your thoughts. So pretty much, but definitely about the ending and stuff like that. How do we'll have to start thinking about that.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Louis?
I think just one question again. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Warren, for all the work you're doing on this. What's our communication strategy been just in terms of letting neighbors on Second Street, the Soapers Park townhomes, like all those folks who are immediate to Third Street Center? Yeah.
We have not, as a town, we have not directly communicated with them. We have had some posts on Facebook, as did Voces Unidas, and we have spoken to a number of them. But one of the things with this communication plan, as far as getting information out to the public, is making sure that we make the best use of the multiple avenues that we have to communicate with people. Some people are on Facebook, some people aren't. Some people will look at the website, some people won't. The Soper Sun, the Post Independent, the radio, Katie and Kay on Friday morning or what have you. So that's what we're putting together right now. Bless you. That's what we're putting together right now, is what we hope will be a comprehensive way of communicating, in a way that the town residents know exactly where they can go to get the latest information. It won't necessarily, even if it's not pushed to them, if they're curious, they will be able to ask a question. One of the things that I'll just move on from this a little bit. One of the things that we're doing, we're setting up a special page on the website just for that information. We may very well be doing some sort of what did my daughter call it? A link tree? Something where you go one place and there's a bunch of other links that you could just follow down. And she said to me, you guys should do a link tree. And I said, what's that? So, clearly, like 4 generations removed, but we also have set up some other ways to communicate or to allow the newcomers to communicate. For example, we now have a PO box. So if they need a mailing address and paperwork needs to come here, it doesn't have to come to Town Hall, it doesn't have to come to Third Street Center, what have you. That's effective as of yesterday. We will have an email address that is specifically for this, that at this point, we're not sure exactly who will have access to monitor that. It'll probably start with Rob and myself and maybe Anna, but just working on those kind of back and forth levels of communication. And honestly, sometimes some of the information that I get is actually from those people instead of going the other way around. So.
Yeah, Colin, do you want to comment on the neighbors?
We also, just like when someone has a project, like building a house, they have to notify the neighbors. And we might want to go notify neighbors when we activate new sites.
Yep.
Obviously, we weren't able to do that. And we've had, so the Sopers View, they have a homeowners association and they've reached out to us. We're going to try and get them some information, hopefully from the town for their HOA meeting in December. Second Street are a little more challenging. They don't have an HOA. But I think either some mailings or some knocks on doors would be really helpful in all these situations. I think people are going to be fine as long as they know. It's when they don't know, they get really concerned about what the heck's going on. So something to include in our communication package.
Yep.
Okay, looks like we're ready to move on. Thank you, Rob, and hear from Lauren about the resolution and letter and other kind of next steps.
There are a couple of things that I'd like to just let you know about before I go there with the resolution and the letter to DOLA. The first one is in talking about counties, excuse me, and surrounding towns. I do have a managers meeting tomorrow morning with the Garfield County manager and all of the town managers in Garfield County. We've spoken at different levels, but it's time to pull everybody together. Eagle County and Pitkin County have basically said, let us know how we can help. We have not gone to them with any kind of plan yet because we are working with DOLA first. And then we'll see, maybe we can fill some gaps in other ways. Had a long conversation this morning with Voces Unidas and Rob and myself and about language and about, we've gone round and round and round about what words do we use to describe this group and the people in the group. Are they refugees? Are they migrants? Are they immigrants? Are they, what have you? And we sort of talked about, when there are legal documents involved, or requests for funding or resolutions or things that might have consequences that are based on a definition of a word, that refugees is appropriate. But Alex Sanchez from Voces Unidas suggested that internally and amongst ourselves and amongst the newcomers, that maybe they should be called newcomers or new arrivals or what have you, because they have some sensitivity to what the language is and to what that might engender as far as how other people feel about them. So I just wanted to mention that. The language in the letter and the resolution say refugees, because I don't believe that newcomers has any kind of legal
Standing.
Yeah. Exactly. But I wanted to bring that up because I thought it was a very good point. And even the word immigrant, we talked about the fact that, if immigrant is this all-encompassing terminology, then it doesn't make any kind of distinction between someone who immigrated 40 years ago and is now a US citizen or what have you. They're still an immigrant. And these new arrivals who have different needs at the moment. So anyway, we could have more of a conversation about that, but I wanted to make sure that you were aware that there was some sensitivity and there were there are ongoing conversations about that in order to be sensitive to both the legal needs of being able to gain and gather assistance that's needed, and also to be able to treat people with dignity and respect. So I wanted to make sure that I pointed that out. Let's see what else is on my list. Just for your information, Voces Unidas has gathered several immigration attorneys to come twice to the 3rd Street Center in December. The first time is after tomorrow. To basically, it's more of an education session to tell people if you're going to file for, there are a number of different things. There's a work permit, there's temporary protected status, which may or may not include a work authorization. There's also something called humanitarian parole, which is something completely different. But if, depending on what they are qualified for and what they want to apply for, they will need particular pieces of paper, identifications or passports or proof of this, that, or the other thing, birth certificates, et cetera. And so what's happening on Thursday is kind of a legal education. This is what you'll need to bring in order to apply. And then on the 27th of December, there is another legal clinic, which is actually helping the newcomers apply for some of these programs. I do not know how many people on the 27th will have been able to gather the appropriate documentation, but they are working through that. And I believe that the attorneys are volunteering their time for that. And I think it's Jennifer Smith. What's her name from Alpine Legal Services?
Alex, but I can't remember her last name.
And one other immigration attorney. Claire Noon, yeah. So that's a start anyway. So what you have, what was in the packet that was added, you know, when the board decided to have a special meeting on this last week, I had talked to the mayor about, you know, do we want something in the packet? What have you? Is this just a discussion? Whatever. In the meantime, because things are moving fast and furious with regard to this, having the opportunity to request emergency funding from DOLA and what that entailed, in order to do that this evening, we added some documentation and revised the agenda yesterday because I felt that these were important documents and needed public notice, even if it was only 24 hours in advance, to be able to really have a good discussion on this. So there were two choices really with regard to declaring something by the town in order to qualify for this emergency funding from DOLA. And I will say that Dana Levac from DOLA is on the Zoom, so I will depend on him to go ahead and speak up if I say something that's wrong. So, but I thank you, Dana, for basically being on call, and we're talking every day at this point. So initially I thought that in order to request these emergency funds, which are reimbursement funds, the town would have to declare a local emergency, officially declare, according to statute, a local emergency. The same way that you did when COVID hit, and, you know, when there's a natural disaster, those kinds of things happen. And then a whole cycle of things go into effect with emergency management at the county level and et cetera. The more I read about that and the more I thought about it, the more I thought that that might not be the way you would want to go. So I called DOLA and said, is it a requirement? I know these are emergency funds, but is it a requirement to actually declare per statute a local emergency? And the suggestion was that that the board vote on a resolution. Basically, and you probably, I'm sure, all read it, that says, this is what's happening. This is beyond the capacity of the town to adequately manage because of the numbers that are involved. We do not have adequate resources to manage it without assistance from the state and other local entities, nonprofits, and other jurisdictions. So I put that together. And then I also put in the resolution 3 tasks really that were authorized by this resolution. The first one was to allow me to appropriately contract with, whether it's a communications company or leasing space in a building or hiring a security firm to help manage this as part of an overall plan. Because it's so all encompassing, I put an expiration date on that of April 1st, 2024.
We noticed
Unless-
that's April Fool's.
Well, I didn't put that in there because of that, Marty. But thanks for that. But I, that way it sort of forces us to come back and review and renew if other decisions are made. Secondly, that upon adoption of the resolution, the mayor is authorized to sign this request letter, which we'll talk about in a second, from DOLA requesting emergency funding. And then lastly, that I'm authorized to seek additional emergency funding from other agencies, including Garfield County, to supplement any dollars granted by the state. So it is my understanding from DOLA that this resolution will suffice as opposed to a real declaration of emergency. What this supports is the letter that is requesting, it explains the situation again, slightly different terms, and basically authorizes us to request emergency grant funding and breaks down what that grant funding is meant to pay for. That language is directly related to the allowable expenses that the emergency funding is supposed to be for. It includes housing assistance services, which is for shelter, but it also includes rental costs, custodial services, security, utilities, sanitary services. If we have to rent a, what I priced was a 6 toilet sanitation trailer from one of these other companies. And then I added it up for a 4-month emergency period. Refugee response services, which could be language services, translation, medical care, medical supplies, public health services, food, clothing, hygiene products, etc. Transportation and travel, which might mean transferring refugees / newcomers between shelter facilities or potentially relocation services. Somebody has a job someplace, they have an offer, they can go there. This is what happened with this woman and her child. They got an offer in Washington, DC. They didn't have the capacity to get themselves there. Those kinds of relocation services could be paid for by us and reimbursable under this grant funding. And then local government staffing, which is staffing that's outside of our normal budget, hiring shelter coordinators or managers, additionally, if there are contracts, leases that we sign with, or rental contracts that we sign with facilities, and we need to have those reviewed by our town attorney, that's a reimbursable expense. And communication efforts for contractors that we hire to assist us with this. So I added all of it up, got a lot of help getting estimates and everything else. I still suspect that this number is low. Because we're still waiting for some estimates for nightly security patrolling of potentially multiple locations. But the best I could do was $223,880. If there is a panel of, I believe, 12 regional directors from DOLA and a couple of other people who will be approving or not approving or adjusting this, and we may not get the full amount. They could give us a lesser amount. But I wanted to give them the most detailed cost estimate that I could.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for everybody that helped put that estimate together. I mean, this has been a key kind of piece in the puzzle that's taken us a little while. And I think some people have wondered why it's taken us a month to get to this point, but I think you can now see, you know, everybody can see the level of detail that has to be planned in order to even request funding and then to move forward with that plan. Questions or comments on either the resolution or the letter, which are connected? The resolution authorizes the letter. Lonnie.
One question, historically, what is the likelihood of DOLA entertaining a secondary request if we're still active in April?
I don't know, but I think Dana can answer that. I saw you unmute yourself.
I did. It would always be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. It would have to come in as a separate new application. I don't think you can supplement an emergency grant.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, thoughts, Erica?
Thank you
Mhm.
for all your hard work on this. Is there a reason why we're only calling out seeking funding from other agencies, only including Garfield County and maybe not the other two counties?
No, we'll ask the other two counties as well.
Okay.
We've already had some conversations with them, but since Garfield is our county,
Right.
I wanted to specifically name that.
Okay.
Marty?
Yeah, so in conjunction with this, I think it'd be prudent for us to set aside money from our reserves to cover this, because this is money we have to lay out and then it'll get reimbursed, which means we're gonna have to have receipts and document it. Okay, personally, I think this number is low. If I was gonna say, I would add like 25%, make it like 300,000 that we set aside from reserves for this. And this is a good example of why we like to have the reserves. This is something no one foresaw. Hopefully, with DOLA's help, we'll be made whole. But, you know, we have to do something with this. We can't just go on procrastinating and hoping that some miracle is going to show up.
Thanks, Marty. I mean, I think, Lauren, I don't know if you have any comments on that. I feel like we might see a supplemental budget resolution and we're going to see our final budget next meeting. Maybe I would defer to you and our finance director on kind of how to go ahead and spend and then get reimbursed.
I'll ask Christy how she would like to handle that.
But our goal is that
I mean,
we
she's
do get,
aware.
yeah, that we do get reimbursed and that this doesn't take a permanent hit to our operating or
Well, and I suspect that if we are short, that we may have some success requesting supplemental funding from the three counties.
Okay, Colin.
Well, I would just want to echo, Marty, we shouldn't underestimate how much this is going to cost us. And if we can, let's just be clear that we have it. And if we can get help from the state, great. But as we all know, this is overwhelming all kinds of systems that we currently have, and it might be that they might not be able to cover everything we need. So just so we have some clarity on what you have to work with, I think it
Right.
would be wise to include a number like Marty suggested.
Question, for this type of an expenditure, since I'm not familiar with this type of an expenditure, is there any kind of a tax benefit to having this on our? No,
No.
it's just an operating expense.
I mean, we don't pay taxes as a town,
Yeah.
so.
Well, yeah, but just the way it's accounted for, no.
No, it's just a matter of, justifying whatever the expense was based on the result but the request, when we submit for reimbursement from DOLA.
Okay, thank you.
Dana, do you want to speak at all about how that, because I don't remember, how often can we request the reimbursements? Is it monthly? Is it quarterly?
Generally, it's a quarterly reimbursement you'll file quarterly reports just like with your other grants.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And one
Yep.
So I'm very supportive of the resolution. I'm also supportive of the emergency funding, but because Third Street is potentially a shelter site going forward, I'm going to recuse myself from this. I mean, the reality is it would only support ancillary shelter expenses, toilets, cleaning, those kinds of things. It wouldn't be going to staffing. So, but I don't want to have any perceived conflict of interest. So for that, when you're ready, I will
That's a good
leave
idea.
the room.
Thanks for letting us know. And I would say you don't even have to leave the room because we're here for the discussion, but I think recusing yourself to avoid any perception of a conflict from the vote makes sense. So thank you for that, Colin. I wouldn't have thought of that. Any other discussion before we entertain a motion? And the motion just needs to be to adopt it's to adopt, I guess, resolution number 14. Otherwise we wouldn't make a motion if we didn't want to adopt it.
Just one comment.
Yeah.
Really. Thank you, Lauren, for this. And I mean, yeah, I agree with Marty that this figure seems probably low. Part of me is amazed at the outpouring of support from this community for these newcomers. But I can't help also but realize that we've been in this issue for a long time with people who have been here and are struggling to make ends meet. So I just want us to not forget that there's things that I think as a community could have done sooner to help those. And I think when we see this outpouring, it's great and it's amazing, but I know there is some criticism out there in terms of, like how we're addressing this. So.
Thank you for bringing that up, Luis, because I want to make the point that this is both and.
Yeah.
This is not just, if we're doing this, we're not just doing this for certain people and not for other people. The fact is that having all these newcomers is what put us over the edge. But we do have our own unhoused population, as small as it may be.
Yeah.
And
and those who are on the verge of being unhoused.
Yeah.
So.
And I would assume that these shelters are not going to discriminate based on where you're from.
That
And
is
that if
correct.
somebody comes and says, I'm experiencing homelessness and I need to come inside to this warm place for the night, that they will be admitted. Right?
correct.
That's my assumption. And I think that's important. I mean, I think you raise a really important point, Luis, and I was going to say in closing comments, but I'll say now just that we are explicitly not prioritizing this group over any other group. We're dealing with a situation that landed on our doorstep at the start of winter. That's a kind of a humanitarian crisis. And so I do understand those concerns in the community as well, because it could be perceived that way. But I also want to remind folks that every one of our agendas is packed with affordable housing and workforce housing initiatives right now. We're full speed ahead, leaving no stone unturned on what we can do to house our current workforce. And I think if we had 100 unhoused people living under the bridge, I don't care where they're from, right, at any point going into winter, we would have had to respond. I hope that this also, as we start to talk about how to wind this down in coming months, we also talk about what our long-term commitment is. And again, I would hope for a more regional kind of valley-wide approach, and that it doesn't just land on one town government or another. But yeah, it's certainly shining a light, and Erica mentioned at one of our meetings on not just the need for like emergency congregate shelter, you know, homelessness type housing, but also that transitional housing. How do you get to the next step? Because what we've been focused on is the really long-term, you know, established folks with a stable job and all that. And we haven't been forced to address this, so maybe it'll be a good end result. Yeah.
And it could even be, you know, kind of one of the leads on this working group or task force, where it's kind of, they're there to listen to what's going on, because we're very much in crisis mode short term, but then that person or group that they're working with could be a liaison with the regional housing and look at these, because I've looked into it further and seen that like Montrose is currently building transitional housing. You know, Grand Junction currently has a transitional housing project being built. There's migrant farm labor housing in Delta that I drive by every time I'm in Delta, which is frequently, for those who don't know. And so I just think there's these other models right in our neighboring communities that honestly had never really occurred to me to be part of our housing discussion. And so I think this is an opportunity to, now we're aware of it, there's models out there. And so what can we do to make it better for everybody going forward out of this? So I'm definitely supportive of that, of the long-term vision.
I'll just throw one thing in. I came from a meeting about 10 days ago, Tri-County senior meeting, and hearing all of these conversations that are going on around the area. The seniors are starting to pop up too and complain about the silver tsunami coming, and that the communities are not prepared for affordable housing for that subset of individuals. And so I just wanted to toss that in there to not forget that group as well, because they've been following this too.
Yeah, fundamentally, we need a lot more housing for everybody,
Yeah.
except very high incomes. They're very well taken care of, very well housed, but you know, it is ultimately supply and demand, all these housing problems, and there's just not enough places to live for people at lower ends of the income spectrum across the United States, and especially in places like Carbondale. So we'll keep working on it. Any other thoughts before somebody wants to make a motion?
I just want to second what Louise pointed out, because, and I've said this before, we have people sleeping in their cars who are working. Okay. And so, yes, maybe they want to go to these shelters, maybe they don't. And until we provide better alternatives for them. And it isn't one or two people, it's literally dozens of people. So this problem has been here before. It's exacerbated. It's brought to a head because of the number of people in a short period of time and the focus the media has presented on it. But this problem has been here. It's gone worse over the last 5-10 years. And this just brings it to a head. But this is what we have to deal with on an emergency basis. And again, will not discriminate against anyone.
Okay.
I would move to approve resolution number 14, series of 2023. A resolution of the Board of Trustees of the Town of Carbondale providing for humanitarian response to the arrival of more than 100 refugees in Carbondale, and authorize an application for emergency funding from the Colorado Department of Local Affairs.
Second.
Motion by Erica, second by Lonnie. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstain? Colin, did you abstain?
Oh, I think I can vote on that.
Okay, well, that authorizes me to
Heather.
sign the letter.
Okay, well, I will abstain.
Okay, so 6 yes votes and 1
I thought we
abstention.
were gonna do the second.
Yeah, I mean, this explicitly authorizes the signing of that, so I don't think we have to. That's okay. So Colin abstains. I think we've talked a lot. We're right on time, so it's a pretty efficient meeting. What about a preview of next steps? now that we have this authorization, obviously we'll send the letter, we'll seek the funding. But maybe Rob, if you could outline for us, like, how soon could we expect this distributed shelter model to maybe start taking form?
One thing I'm learning is it's probably gonna be one at a time, as opposed to all at once. And so all of these different sites have their own internal process of management, governance structure usually that they have to work through to get to yes. And so I think the soonest we could see it is sometime next week. That's optimistic. Maybe sooner I don't think actually making the change sooner, but thinking about next week if the town, has a shelter site that it can offer. So incremental steps starting probably next week. I feel personally a lot of urgency, and I know everybody else does too. But the decision-making process in a democracy is deliberative.
And you did pose a question for us that I think is worth returning to. Does anyone on the board have a problem if staff can make it work? The idea would probably be closing off this, which we had closed for every meeting until COVID, except for big comprehensive plan sessions. And maybe using that it could be any number of things. It could be a place to go during the day. It could be a place to eat a meal, or it could be an overnight shelter. We'd let the team figure that out.
Not to interrupt.
Yeah.
Truth in advertising, the greatest need is overnight.
Okay.
And so, it's hard to find folks who can dedicate an overnight space.
So it'd be overnight use, pick it up during the day. Does anybody have major issues with that?
The difficulty with overnight use in this room, on the other side of that, is that probably means that all the Board of Commission meetings would have to be moved.
Well, they could be on this side.
We
Like-
used to just use this side all
This
the
is
time.
what we
for-
use.
Right, but there's noise involved.
Yeah, sure.
If they come in at 4:30 and then there's a meeting on this side every night. So we have to really think through that.
Yeah.
We could probably find, you want to speak to
I think
finding,
between the school district and the library and CMC, fire station, I mean, there are some places that have spaces. It's a lot easier to say, hey, can we hold a meeting here? And it's more appropriate for like school sites. So I can work on that part of it. There's definitely going to be downstream impact for any site.
Mhm. We also, because we have the OWL camera, we do have the ability to have movable meetings.
So we could move some meetings online. So I think that's an important statement, though, that so far, and I just want to reiterate, by Colin's really leadership as an individual and as leader of the Third Street Center, that's why we have a shelter there. That was not a town run thing and is not still. And so I really appreciate, and I know we all do, Colin stepping up and opening the doors of that way before we had a plan. And so as we start to put together a plan, it feels like it is time for the town to step forward in some capacity. So we're not going to tell you where to do it or how to do it, but it sounds like you have our support to examine the feasibility of town-owned facilities, including this room. Yeah.
Quick question. You feel, obviously, the shelter is number one priority, but on clothing, how well is that being addressed? Because that's something, if you do a clothing drive this time of year, before the holidays, religious organization or a nonprofit organization does it. The newspapers here, Soper Sun, get it on the radio by Friday, get in there next week's edition. I mean, these people need coats, winter coats.
So my first answer is I don't know, but I have a little information that makes me feel it's not a primary concern.
Okay.
We're hearing from VOCES that they've been able to fill the need. There's I don't know if it's faith-based or it's Nikki working on her own, but they're setting up like a clothing store, a pop-up clothing store. So they're working on gathering, that's in the works without our intervention.
Which is
So those
even
two
better.
things reasure me. It looks like
Yeah,
Colin knows
and
more.
So it's happened already.
Okay.
And Nikki Delson has really helped organize
Mhm.
that. Some other true members and near new. There's gonna be another one, I believe, on the 20th of December. So
Okay.
to echoing Rob's point, but it seems to be handled. It's, the shelter is the most important thing, and then, obviously food after that.
Okay.
The only
Thanks.
thing, the only thing that I've heard that is really still at the forefront, and I don't know what sizes or what have you, but Irene would know, is snow boots.
Snow boots, okay. And is there? a
They
point
mentioned
of-
that this morning on the call.
Is there an immediate point of contact for people who want to help out in some way and they don't know who to contact?
There will shortly be that email address, so
Yeah.
like that would be best. And I'm not very good at managing text and things
Yeah.
like that with offers of help, but so I'm hoping that's a way that we can then organize and break it down.
Okay.
And then identify that lead organization to coordinate volunteer offers.
So I
It's
guess
kind of
just
a not yet.
for people listening, I mean, I noticed there's a few people on the Zoom, there's probably people on YouTube, there's others who will read about this in the paper. It sounds like, stay tuned. For
Actually, so I mean,
help.
for food, to contact Rennie. And I
Right
believe
for now.
we've got that information up. We
It's
posted it
on-
on Facebook.
It's
but-
on it's pinned to the top of our Facebook page.
Okay,
And I believe it's on Voces Unidas'
yes. So
Facebook page as
Rennie
well.
Whitlock is the key contact for donations and food, even ongoing, and then we can just transition as we
Right.
need to.
And we will have that email address tomorrow and probably a lot more information by Monday.
Okay.
And that communications will start going out.
And then we'll have a dedicated page at carbondale.gov.org, our regular website. We'll have a new page.
Correct.
Any other thoughts?
I'll just add that as we're looking at this space, if it makes more sense to just move all of our meetings to some of the other locations, because I hadn't really thought about how there's other locations that might make more sense for meetings. And maybe just this whole room then is, the shelter space, since we've got, it kind of seems ideal. But anyway, I just wanted to say I'd support that as well. We don't necessarily have to cut it in half.
Boys, girls.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're not directing you to do that, but we're saying we're open to it as you assess your options. I would just say in closing, again, thanks to everybody who's been really working so hard on this. Rob for stepping forward, Lauren for not setting aside other work, doing this on top of other work. Colin, Voces Unidas, and all the individuals who stepped forward. I think our role as electeds in this community right now is really to set the tone. We've set a really specific tone so far, and I'm proud of the tone that we've set, and I'm proud of the way that we've been consistent about that. And I think that, there's a lot of detailed work that staff and volunteers and others are doing. But I think our role is to be consistent, to not change course midstream, to be willing to stick to our direction when it gets hard and when we come under fire and get criticized, which we will, and we are already by some, and that's okay too. Yeah, I'm proud of the fact that we have a humanitarian approach as our main goal, and that we're not setting aside those other issues. I just want to keep saying that as we address this. We're tending to all of our normal business. We're spending our budget exactly as planned. This is not coming out of our general fund. We expect to be reimbursed for our expenses, and we need our partners for that. And the thing we need most in this country on this is a coordinated federal level approach to resettling the millions of people who are coming in, and ability for them to work, which is why they're coming here, and get on their feet and be self-sufficient. So people are only dependent as long as they can't get work, and therefore they can't get housing. So we'll continue to advocate for that and to work with our state and federal partners toward hopefully some sort of systematic approach. And for everybody else, I've been in touch with our county commissioners. I've been in touch with all the other mayors in the valley. Lauren's been in touch with all of her staff colleagues. I think Carbondale may be in a lead role now. It happens to have impacted us as one of the earlier small towns in the nation. But I don't think we'll be the last. And so I hope others are watching and listening and preparing. And hopefully we do put together some sort of model that can be replicated, and we can absorb folks into our communities just like we've done for generations. All right.
See if anybody has any questions on them.
I mean, we had open comment at the beginning.
Fine.
Yeah, thank you.
Mentioned
something Yeah.
earlier, so that's why.
Yeah, yeah, I think we've taken our vote and, yeah, I think we're time to move on. Okay, thanks everybody for a special meeting. Meeting adjourned.